I've started a blog recently that focuses on legal issues involving sort of a world with changing technology in it. I'm interested in privacy issues because privacy represents a balance between our instinctive desire to control information about ourselves versus the First Amendment, and in particular the notion that we all live in some part of our lives in public places, in a public space, and that's really important to maintain a political culture in which we all can operate equally as citizens with an equal voice. So, for example, the recent California legislation which enacted the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, I think that's its formal name, imposes a number of consent requirements on sharing information. And the practical, this legislation was adopted very quickly and essentially represented a bargain between a wealthy San Francisco real estate investor who had funded a ballot initiative to place a privacy amendment to the California Constitution on the November ballot, and the legislature, California legislature, which wanted to be in control of that. And so it was passed very quickly in a matter of days, really no dissents. But because it was done so quickly, it wasn't necessarily as carefully worded or as well thought out as intended. So it's likely to change over the next couple of years. It doesn't really take effect till January 1 of 2020. But the core part of the statute is really designed to make it very difficult for anyone to market people's names, addresses, phone numbers, and a whole list of other types of information about them. You know, where they shop, what sort of car they drive, all of this. Now, much of this is in fact public information. If I walk down with you to the car lot or to the parking space down there, I'll probably know exactly what sort of car you drive by the time we finish chatting. So this is really designed, I think, mostly to respond to people's concerns about the large quantity of data that's out there. On the other hand, the net effect of it is going to be that people are going to become much more isolated. It will become much more difficult for people to start new social or political campaigns. If you look at some of the great social movements in the United States, they were really, many of them started by citizens. So if you look at women's suffrage or the labor movement or civil rights, this wasn't the government deciding these things should change. These were people reaching out, connecting with one another, and deciding that they needed, and now I'll quote the First Amendment, to assemble peacefully and seek redress of grievances from the government. Now, these days, so much of our life is lived online that if you take away the ability to do that online because we become isolated from one another, then I think the political power of individuals is weakened. And that's something I'm very concerned about. That's one of the reasons that I've been following the privacy legislation both in Europe and California, and now some actions pending in Congress very closely. I wrote a blog post recently on just this point, And I sort of made the statement that we all accept that one of the virtues of government in the United States is that power is divided. And when we think of the division of power, we typically think of the division between the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the courts. But really, the First Amendment provides for a fourth branch of government, which is the power of individuals. And really, if you look at privacy 40 years ago, 50 years ago, there were telephone books. Probably half the population doesn't know what a telephone book looks like anymore. But people's phone numbers were by default available. Their mailing addresses were by default available. And so that people, advertisers, but also ordinary people, or as I said, social movements, could reach out to individuals. And in fact, they could walk up physically to their door and knock on their door unless somebody put out a no solicitation sign, which some people did, but most people were, willing to tolerate the occasional religious or other groups that came up and knocked on their door. That was really easier to do than to, in fact, go out and buy a sign and post it. I think people are maybe, particularly in more urban areas, are less comfortable now than they used to be with people knocking on their doors. But the public space really is the internet. That's an area where there's no security threat really in terms of somebody sending you something. In fact, if you go and you look at the FTC rule on emails, everybody thinks, and I hear frequently, it's illegal to send an unsolicited email. And that, in fact, is not true. The FTC makes an exception for email that's protected by the First Amendment. Now, one can argue how broad that is, but certainly if it's a political point of view, it's absolutely protected by the First Amendment. There's a lot of quibbling or a lot of debate as to whether commercial messages should also be protected. But the FTC, in its CAN-SPAM Act, talks about, sets the restrictions on mass emailing. And in fact, you can mass email everybody if you want to. There are only a few requirements. One is you have to have a good subject matter line. And secondly, you have to disclose the name and address. And third, you give somebody the chance to unsubscribe, just like that no solicitation sign, or I think you even used to have to pay if you wanted an unlisted phone number. So the FTC has imposed somewhat similar requirements on commercial email. But in fact, you really can email whomever you want. It's not illegal to do that. And it seems to me we have to be cautious about going overboard in this area. For the reasons I've already talked about.